Tonight, we're going to explore a fact about the physical world that is hiding in plain sight. You have never touched anything in your life, not the chair you are sitting in, not the food you have eaten, not the hands of the people you love, not the ground beneath your feet, not a single object in the entire history of your existence on this planet has ever made contact with your body in the way you intuitively imagine contact to work. And it is not just you. Nothing in the universe truly touches anything else. Not atoms, not molecules, not planets crashing into each other at thousands of miles per hour, not neutron stars colliding in explosions that outshine entire galaxies. Contact, in the sense of two things genuinely occupying the same space, of surfaces pressing against surfaces, of matter meeting matter, does not happen. It has never happened. It cannot happen as far as our best physics can determine. The reason involves one of the most fundamental and least intuitive discoveries in all of science: the fact that matter is not really solid in any meaningful sense. The fact that what we call contact is actually a form of electromagnetic warfare, fought at distances so small they are invisible to any instrument except the most sensitive probes physics has ever devised. The fact that the universe is, at its finest scale, almost entirely empty space, and what we experience as solidity is a quantum mechanical illusion of extraordinary sophistication. But here is the part that makes this more than a physics curiosity. When you understand why nothing truly touches, you discover things about the nature of matter, about the structure of atoms, about the origin of the forces that hold the world together, that are more extraordinary than the illusion they explain. The universe does not let things touch, but what it does instead is so astonishing, so elegant, so unexpected that the inability to touch seems like a fair trade for what you get in its place. 7 profound discoveries about why nothing in the universe truly touches, and what that reveals about the nature of reality itself. Before we begin, if these questions about the hidden physics underneath everyday experience are the kind of thing that makes the world feel stranger and richer at the same time, hit like or subscribe. It costs nothing and helps us reach more people who want to think about things like this. Now, let's begin. The year is 1909. 2 physicists at the University of Manchester, Hans Geiger and Ernest Marsden, are conducting an experiment under the supervision of Ernest Rutherford that will shatter the prevailing model of what matter is made of. They are firing alpha particles, which are the nuclei of helium atoms, at an extremely thin sheet of gold foil. The alpha particles are produced by a radioactive source and travel at about 15,000 kilometers per second. The gold foil is so thin that Geiger and Marsden expected the alpha particles to pass straight through with only minor deflections, the way a bullet passes through tissue paper. The accepted model of the atom at the time was proposed by J.J. Thomson, who had discovered the electron in 1897. Thomson imagined the atom as a diffuse sphere of positive charge with electrons embedded in it like raisins in a pudding. The plum pudding model, as it came to be called, predicted that the positive charge was spread so uniformly through the atom that particles passing through it would experience only gentle, uniform deflections. Nothing would be bounced back. And then Geiger and Marsden found that some alpha particles were bouncing almost straight back. Rutherford's reaction became famous. He said it was as if you had fired artillery shells at tissue paper and they came back and hit you. The result was incompatible with the plum pudding model. If the positive charge were spread uniformly through the atom, no scattered particle would have experienced a strong enough repulsion to be deflected through a large angle, let alone sent back the way it came. Rutherford Rutherford spent months analyzing the data and eventually arrived at a model that fit. The atom's positive charge is not spread uniformly. It is concentrated in an extraordinarily small central region, a nucleus so dense and so tiny that most alpha particles fly right past it without coming close. Only the rare alpha particle that happened to be aimed almost directly at the nucleus experienced the strong repulsion that sent it bouncing back. The numbers he calculated were stunning. The nucleus is about 10,000 to 100,000 times smaller than the atom itself. If you scaled an atom to the size of a sports stadium, the nucleus would be roughly the size of a marble at the center of the field. The rest of the atom is almost entirely empty space, occupied only by the diffuse probability clouds of the orbiting electrons. Matter is mostly nothing. This is the foundation of why nothing truly touches. If atoms are almost entirely empty space, then when two objects come into contact, what is actually happening is not the meeting of solid substance. It is the interaction between the mostly empty structures that constitute matter. Two objects in contact are like two sports stadiums brought close together. Their inner structures, their fields and particles interact at a distance. The concrete and steel of the actual structures never meets. Only the space between them narrow. The first discovery. Atoms are mostly empty, but empty is not nothing. The numbers are extraordinary. An atom's diameter is approximately 100 picometers, 1/10,000,000th of a meter. The nucleus is about 1 femtometer in diameter, 1/quadrillionth of a meter. The ratio of the atom's size to the nucleus's size is roughly 100,000 to 1. To visualize this ratio, imagine a marble placed at the center of a circle with a radius of about 5 kilometers. The marble is the nucleus. The circle's edge is where the electron cloud begins to thin to negligibility. Between the marble and the edge of that vast circle, almost nothing, just the quantum mechanical probability distribution of the electron. But here is the crucial subtlety that changes everything, that almost nothing is not emptiness in the way that an evacuated jar is empty. The space inside an atom is not a vacuum. It is a region of intense quantum mechanical activity. The electron does not orbit the nucleus the way a planet orbits a star, following a well-defined path at a specific location at each moment. The electron exists in a superposition of positions spread out through the atom as a probability cloud, a quantum state that assigns a probability amplitude to every point in space. This probability cloud is real. It is a physical entity, not just a mathematical description of our ignorance. The electron is genuinely in multiple places simultaneously in the quantum mechanical sense. And this probability cloud, this smear of quantum mechanical existence, exerts real physical effects. It participates in chemical bonding. It generates electromagnetic fields. It is what atoms use to interact with each other. When two atoms approach each other, the first thing that happens, long before any classical notion of contact could apply, is that their electron probability clouds begin to overlap. They begin to interact, and what happens when they interact determines whether the atoms attract, repel, bond, or ignore each other. The emptiness inside atoms is not passive. It is the stage on which atomic physics plays out. The electron clouds fill it with quantum fields that extend to every point in the atom's interior and far beyond. The atom is not a solid sphere with a hard surface. It is a region of space dominated by a particular configuration of quantum field. And when two such regions approach each other, their field configurations interact before their centers come anywhere near each other. Contact in this quantum mechanical world is not a geometric concept. It is a field concept. Two atoms in contact means two atoms whose quantum fields are interacting significantly, and those fields interact at a distance. They always have. They do not need to be in the same place. Contact, when you look closely enough, is interaction at a distance, just at very short distances. The second discovery. The force that stops your hand is electricity in disguise. When you press your hand against a table, what stops your hand from passing through? The intuitive answer is that the table is solid and your hand is solid, and solid things cannot occupy the same space. But we have just established that neither your hand nor the table is solid in any meaningful physical sense. Both are almost entirely empty space. So what is actually stopping what? The answer is electromagnetism. Specifically, the electromagnetic repulsion between the electron clouds of the atoms in your hand and the electron clouds of the atoms in the table's surface. Electrons are negatively charged. Negative charges repel other negative charges. When the electron clouds of the atoms in your hand approach the electron clouds of the atoms in the table surface, those clouds carry the same kind of electric charge. They repel each other. The repulsion grows stronger as the clouds approach more closely. It pushes back against the force of your hand pressing down. The normal force, the force that tables exert upward on objects placed on them, that floors exert upward on your feet, that your chair exerts upward on your body, is electromagnetic in origin. It is the repulsion between electron clouds preventing the interpenetration of atomic structures. This might seem straightforward, but the implications are staggering. The force you experience as solidity is the same fundamental force responsible for light. Electromagnetism is the force carried by photons. Light is an electromagnetic wave. The hardness of rock, the pressure of a handshake, the resistance of air against a moving hand, the pain of a physical impact. All of these are electromagnetic phenomena. All of these are the same fundamental force that produces the radio waves carrying this content to your device. And the photons entering your eyes as you read. You feel solid objects because photons are constantly being exchanged between the electron clouds of different atoms. These are not the visible photons that carry light from screens to eyes. They are virtual photons, exchange particles that carry the electromagnetic force over short distances. The table feels solid because your hand and the table are engaging in a constant exchange of virtual photons that produces the repulsive force you experience as hardness. You are, at this moment, floating above your chair on a cushion of electromagnetic radiation. Not metaphorically, physically. The electrons in your body are being prevented from moving into the space occupied by the chair's electrons by the electromagnetic repulsion carried by virtual photon exchange. You are separated from the chair by a distance of a few angstroms, a few 10/1000ths of a meter, across which electromagnetic forces are balancing your weight. You never make contact with the chair. You and the chair reach an electromagnetic equilibrium at a very small but non-zero distance. This is what every instance of what we call touch actually is. Electromagnetic equilibrium at the quantum scale, not contact. Electromagnetic negotiation. The third discovery. The Pauli exclusion principle is a rule against being in the same place. Electromagnetism alone, the repulsion between like charges, is not the only reason you cannot pass through a table. There is a second, deeper reason that comes from quantum mechanics and has nothing to do with charge. In 1925, Wolfgang Pauli formulated the exclusion principle that bears his name. The Pauli exclusion principle states that no two fermions, particles with half-integer spin such as electrons, protons, and neutrons, can occupy the same quantum state in the same system simultaneously. Two electrons can be in the same atom only if they have opposite spins. Once all available quantum states are occupied, the system resists further compression with a force called degeneracy pressure. This is not a force force in the way gravity or electromagnetism is a force. It is a direct consequence of the quantum mechanical nature of fermions. The wave function describing two identical fermions must be antisymmetric, meaning it changes sign when the two particles are exchanged. For the two fermions to be in the same quantum state, the wave function would have to equal its own negative, which means it would have to equal zero. No wave function, no particle. The particles simply cannot exist in the same state. When matter is compressed, electrons are forced into higher and higher energy states as the lower states fill up. The more compressed the matter, the more energy the electrons must have. This energy increase is what manifests as a repulsive force resisting further compression. It is not electromagnetic. It is quantum statistical. It is the universe enforcing its rule that identical fermions cannot be in the same place doing the same thing. Degeneracy pressure is what prevents white dwarf stars from collapsing under their own gravity. A white dwarf is the cooling remnant of a star like our Sun, compressed by gravity to roughly the size of Earth. The electrons in a white dwarf are packed so tightly that electron degeneracy pressure, the resistance of electrons to being squeezed into the same quantum states, is what holds the star up against gravity. Not fusion, not heat, purely the quantum mechanical rule against identical particles sharing the same state. When you press your hand against a table, both electromagnetic repulsion and Pauli exclusion are contributing to the resistance you feel. The electromagnetic repulsion comes first, at slightly longer distances. As the electron clouds interact, the Pauli exclusion pressure becomes important at shorter distances, preventing electrons from occupying the same states. Together, they produce the solidity you experience, and together they ensure that no two objects ever truly occupy the same space. Not because space has a rule against it, but because the quantum mechanical particles that constitute matter have a rule against sharing states. Non-touching is not just a macroscopic fact. It is enforced at the most fundamental level by the quantum statistics of the particles from which everything is made. The fourth discovery, the closest things ever come to touching, reveals new physics. If ordinary matter never truly touches, what happens when we force matter together so violently that the electromagnetic and Pauli exclusion barriers are overcome? What happens at the extremes of compression and collision? The answer is some of the most exotic physics in the known universe. When a massive star, at least 8 to 20 times the mass of our Sun, exhausts its nuclear fuel, its core collapses catastrophically. The electromagnetic structure of the atoms, the electron clouds that give matter its volume, is overwhelmed by gravity. The electrons are forced into the protons in an inverse beta decay process, converting them into neutrons. The entire core, which had a mass between 1 and 3 solar masses, collapses to a sphere about 20 kilometers across, a neutron star. In a neutron star, the matter is so dense that ordinary atomic structure has been destroyed. The electrons and protons have merged into neutrons. The neutrons are packed together to nuclear density. 1 teaspoon of neutron star material would have a mass of approximately 1 billion tons on Earth. The density is roughly equivalent to compressing all of humanity into the volume of a sugar cube. But even in a neutron star, the matter does not truly touch. The neutrons are prevented from further compression by neutron degeneracy pressure, the same quantum statistical effect as electron degeneracy pressure, but operating on neutrons rather than electrons. The neutrons resist being forced into the same quantum states. The neutron star achieves an equilibrium in which gravity is balanced by neutron degeneracy pressure. When 2 neutron stars orbit each other and spiral together through gravitational wave emission, eventually colliding, the violence of the collision is unimaginable. stellar masses collide at significant fractions of the speed of light. The energy released is so extreme that it briefly outshines entire galaxies in gamma rays. The gravitational waves from the collision ripple through space-time across billions of light years. In the collision, the neutron degeneracy pressure may be overcome. The matter of two neutron stars is forced together beyond the neutron star density limit. At that point, one of several things can happen. The merged object may exceed the mass limit for a neutron star and collapse into a black hole. Or it may form a more massive and exotic object, a hypermassive neutron star, where matter at densities beyond nuclear density exists in states we do not yet fully understand. In those extreme states, the question of what matter is doing becomes genuinely uncertain. The quarks that constitute the neutrons may be squeezed so closely together that they form a new phase of matter called quark-gluon plasma, where quarks are no longer confined inside individual protons and neutrons, but flow freely through a sea of gluons. This state of matter existed in the first microseconds after the Big Bang, when the entire universe was smaller than a proton. Even quark-gluon plasma does not constitute true touching. The quarks and gluons interact through the strong nuclear force at distances of femtometers, the scale of the atomic nucleus. They exchange gluons, the carrier particles of the strong force, in a seething, interacting medium. They come closer to each other than anything else in the universe, but they remain interacting particles at small but non-zero separations, the closest things ever come to touching in the neutron-star collision in the quark-gluon plasma of the early universe, in the interior of colliding heavy nuclei and particle accelerators, is the transition to states of matter where our concepts of particles and fields become inadequate and new physics must operate. What lies at the absolute minimum of separation, at the Planck length, 1 × 10⁻⁵ meters, is where our theories break down entirely. At that scale, quantum gravitational effects are expected to become important. Space-time itself may become granular, foam-like, losing the smooth, continuous structure we assume at larger scales. What touching would mean at that scale, whether the concept retains any coherence at all, is a question we do not yet have the theory to answer. The fifth discovery: the forces that prevent touching are the same forces that build everything. Here is something extraordinary that deserves its own moment of appreciation. The electromagnetic force that prevents your hand from passing through the table is also the force that holds your hand together. The same repulsion between electron clouds that creates solidity also creates chemical bonds. The same virtual photon exchange that produces hardness also produces the molecular structures of proteins and DNA and every other molecule in your body. Chemistry is electromagnetism at the quantum scale. When atoms bond to form molecules, they are doing so because the overlap of their electron clouds, the interaction of their quantum states, produces a configuration of lower energy than the separated atoms. The hydrogen atoms in a water molecule are not connected by wires. They are connected by shared electron clouds, by quantum states that span both atoms, by the electromagnetic interaction of quantum systems. The structure of everything, from the simplest molecule to the most complex protein to the architecture of the human brain, is entirely the product of electromagnetic forces refusing to let things touch while simultaneously refusing to let them separate. The repulsion prevents interpenetration. The attraction prevents dissociation. Chemistry is the exquisitely precise negotiation between these two tendencies, played out at the quantum scale for every pair of atoms in every molecule. The Pauli exclusion principle, which prevents electrons from sharing quantum states and contributes to the solidity of matter, also gives atoms their chemical variety. The periodic table exists because electrons fill shells of specific quantum states in a specific order, determined by Pauli exclusion. The unique chemistry of carbon, which makes carbon the backbone of all terrestrial biology, comes from the specific configuration of electrons in carbon's partially filled outer shell. A configuration determined by Pauli exclusion applied to carbon's 6 electrons. If electrons could share quantum states, atoms would all collapse to the same lowest energy configuration. Chemistry would disappear. Every atom would look the same. The periodic table would have one element. Life would be impossible. Complexity would be impossible. You would be impossible. The rule that prevents touching is the rule that makes you. The non-touching of quantum matter is not just a curiosity about the hidden world beneath everyday experience. It is the mechanism by which the universe builds structure. The restriction on closeness is what creates chemistry. The electromagnetic warfare between electron clouds is what creates molecular bonds. The quantum statistics of fermions is what creates the rich variety of chemical elements. Touch is impossible. Chemistry is impossible without the prohibition on touch. Life requires the prohibition on touch. The universe builds everything from the rule against true contact. Let's step back from the physics for a moment and appreciate what it means that you have never touched anything. The Voyager spacecraft, which we have explored in a previous video, carries a golden record of human culture. Music, images, greetings, sounds of Earth. The record is physical. It has mass. It occupies space. It is made of gold and copper. And as Voyager travels through interstellar space, the golden record is interacting with the interstellar medium, with the occasional atoms of hydrogen and helium that constitute the thin gas between stars. Those interactions are electromagnetic. Virtual photons exchange between the electrons of the interstellar hydrogen atoms and the electrons of the gold surface. Brief, probabilistic, always at a distance, never touching. The record travels alone. In nearly 50 years of travel, it has covered 14 billion miles, and in all that distance, through the termination shock, through the heliopause, into the interstellar medium, not one atom of the golden record has ever touched one atom of anything it has passed through or passed. The electromagnetic interactions have been real. The drag, negligible as it is in the thin interstellar medium, has been real. But the contact has been illusory, and yet the record is real. The information on it is real. The music it carries is real. The technology that built it was real. All of it built by creatures who similarly never touched anything they created. Hands that never actually made contact with tools. Tools that never actually made contact with materials. Everything constructed from fields negotiating at distances smaller than any human perception can resolve. The golden record was made by creatures who are themselves not touching the surface of the planet they stand on, who walk across a planet without making contact with it, whose every breath, every heartbeat, every neural firing involves electromagnetic interactions that never collapse to zero distance. We are floating beings suspended in electromagnetic fields, building floating objects that carry floating messages into a universe of floating particles that never quite reach each other. The sixth discovery. Light itself doesn't touch things either. We have established that matter does not touch matter. But what about light? When a photon hits your eye, does it touch your retina? The answer is more interesting than yes or no. A photon is not a tiny ball of light that crashes into the molecules of your retina, the way a billiard ball crashes into another billiard ball. A photon is a quantum of the electromagnetic field, a localized excitation of a field that permeates all of space. When we say a photon hits your retina, what we mean is that the electromagnetic field excitation we call the photon is absorbed by the molecules of your retinal cells. The absorption is a quantum mechanical process. The photon does not arrive at the molecule and crash into it. The electromagnetic field of the photon and the electromagnetic field of the molecule interact. The photon's energy is transferred to the molecule, exciting an electron from one quantum state to a higher energy quantum state. The photon ceases to exist as a localized excitation. Its energy is now in the molecule. The molecule has been excited. A chemical change follows. This is how vision works. It is how photosynthesis works. It is how solar cells work. In every case, a photon's energy is transferred to matter through an electromagnetic interaction, not through a classical collision. The photon does not hit the molecule. The photon is absorbed by the molecule's quantum states. The distinction is not semantic. It reflects a genuine difference in the physical process. Photons can also be reflected rather than absorbed. When light bounces off a mirror, the photons do not crash into the mirror's surface and bounce back like tennis balls from a wall. The electromagnetic field of the incoming photons interacts with the electrons in the mirror's surface. The electrons are set into oscillation by the electromagnetic field. The oscillating electrons emit new photons in a specific direction. Reflection is re-emission, not bouncing. Even the interaction between light and matter is not contact. It is field interaction. The electromagnetic field of the photon and the electromagnetic field of the matter interact through quantum mechanical processes. The photon is absorbed and re-emitted, or absorbed and converted into electronic excitation, or transmitted through the material with a change in speed. None of these processes involve the photon touching anything in a classical sense. The universe is made of fields. Particles are excitations of those fields. What we call contact between particles is the interaction of their fields. What we call light hitting an object is the interaction of the electromagnetic field of the photon with the electromagnetic fields of the object's constituent particles. Nothing touches. Fields interact. This field picture is not just a way of speaking about physics that happens to use the word fields. It is the actual structure of quantum field theory, the most precisely tested theory in the history of science. In quantum field theory, the fundamental entities are fields that permeate all of space. Particles are quanta, localized excitations of those fields. Interactions between particles are processes by which field excitations exchange energy and momentum through the mediation of other field excitations, the force carrier particles. The universe is not made of tiny solid things bumping into each other. It is made of fields interacting with fields. The solid world is an emergent phenomenon from the aggregate behavior of quantum fields. Contact is an emergent phenomenon from the repulsive interactions of quantum fields. Solidity is an emergent phenomenon from Pauli exclusion and electromagnetic repulsion. Everything you experience as physical reality is the macroscopic average of quantum field interactions, happening at distances so small that no microscope will ever resolve them. The seventh discovery: the force that holds the nucleus. Together never stops being violent. We have explored the electromagnetic force and Pauli exclusion as the reasons matter does not touch at the atomic scale. But there is another regime inside the nucleus itself, the scale of protons and neutrons, where a different force operates and where the question of touching becomes even stranger. Protons are positively charged. The electromagnetic force between them is repulsive. At the distances separating protons in a nucleus, a few femtometers, the electromagnetic repulsion is enormous. Left to themselves, the protons in a nucleus would fly apart in an instant. They do not fly apart because of the strong nuclear force, one of the four fundamental forces of nature. The strong force is carried by particles called gluons and acts between quarks, the fundamental constituents of protons and neutrons. The strong force has several unusual properties. It is the strongest of the fundamental forces at short distances, many times stronger than electromagnetism. It acts only over very short distances, becoming negligible beyond a few femtometers. And it has a property called confinement, which means quarks cannot exist in isolation. They are always found in bound groups. Inside a proton, 3 quarks are bound together by the strong force. The quarks exchange gluons continuously, and the gluons can themselves produce additional quark-antiquark pairs from their energy, which then annihilate back into gluons. The interior of a proton is a seething, turbulent environment of quarks and gluons in constant exchange. The 3 valence quarks that determine the proton's identity are surrounded by a sea of virtual quark-antiquark pairs and gluons. The proton is not a simple 3-body system. It is a complex quantum many-body system in a state of perpetual violent activity. When protons in a nucleus are close enough for the strong force to operate, a residual version of the strong force, called the nuclear force, acts between protons and neutrons to hold the nucleus together. This residual force overcomes the electromagnetic repulsion and binds the protons and neutrons into the nucleus. But this binding is not like 2 solid things stuck together. It is a dynamic equilibrium of forces. The protons and neutrons in a nucleus are in constant quantum mechanical motion. They are not sitting still in fixed positions. They occupy quantum states spread throughout the nuclear volume. They exchange particles continuously. The nucleus is a quantum system in perpetual motion, held together by the balance of the strong nuclear force and the electromagnetic repulsion and the quantum statistical effects of Pauli exclusion. Even inside the nucleus, at the smallest scales of ordinary matter, things do not touch. Quarks exchange gluons. Protons and neutrons exchange pions. The nuclear interior is a region of field interactions, of particle exchanges, of quantum mechanical overlapping states, but never of classical contact. The concept of touching at the nuclear scale has been replaced entirely by the concept of field interactions in a quantum mechanical framework. And here is the deepest version of this truth. All 4 fundamental forces, gravity, electromagnetism, the strong force, the weak force, work the same way. They all operate through the exchange of carrier particles across distances. Gravity through gravitons, though we have not yet directly detected individual gravitons. Electromagnetism through photons, the strong force through gluons, the weak force through W and Z bosons. In every case, the force is not transmitted by direct contact. It is transmitted by the exchange of particles across a gap. The universe has 4 fundamental forces. Every one of them operates without contact. Every one of them is an interaction at a distance. The universe was not designed with touching as a feature. Interaction at a distance, mediated by force-carrying particles, is the universe's fundamental mechanism for objects to affect each other. Contact is not in the universe's toolkit. It never was. Something important needs to be said here, because you might be wondering whether any of this matters for practical reality. Does it change anything to know that you never truly touch the things you interact with? You still feel the chair. The chair still supports your weight. The food still nourishes you. The handshake still conveys warmth and connection. The impact of a fall still hurts. None of these experiences are changed by the knowledge that the underlying mechanism is electromagnetic field interaction rather than classical contact. And that is true. The emergent reality of the macroscopic world is fully real. The solidity is real, even though it is produced by electromagnetic repulsion. The force of impact is real, even though it is produced by field interactions. The warmth of a hand is real, even though no atoms of one hand are touching any atoms of the other. But the knowledge that contact is electromagnetic negotiation rather than classical meeting does change how you understand the world. It reveals that what we call the solid world is a sustained performance by quantum fields, maintained constantly at every moment, by the continuous exchange of virtual photons between every pair of interacting electron clouds in every pair of interacting objects. The solidity of this world is not a given. It is not a brute fact requiring no explanation. It is an emergent consequence of quantum mechanics applied to matter. It requires the specific quantum mechanical rules that fermions follow. It requires the electromagnetic force to have the strength it has. It requires the Pauli exclusion principle to apply exactly as it does. Change any of these and the solidity either collapses or becomes impenetrable in ways that make chemistry impossible. The world feels solid because the universe has arranged its physics in such a way that quantum field interactions at tiny distances produce macroscopic rigidity. The hardness of rock, the resistance of water, the structure of your body, all of it is quantum field theory in action, at scales 18 orders of magnitude below what you can see. Let's talk about what the prohibition on true contact means for our understanding of the universe's most extreme environments. We have mentioned neutron stars and the quark-gluon plasma, but there is one more extreme worth considering: the interior of a black hole. In a black hole, matter has been compressed beyond the neutron star limit. The neutron degeneracy pressure has been overcome by gravity. The matter falls inward, and from our current theoretical understanding, it converges on a singularity, a point of infinite density. At the singularity, general relativity breaks down. The equations produce infinities that signal the failure of the theory. Something must replace the singularity description. Almost certainly, a theory of quantum gravity will replace the singularity with something finite and more complex, a quantum gravitational state that does not involve infinite density. But in any quantum gravitational description, the matter inside a black hole will still be described by quantum fields. The quarks and gluons and leptons will still be quantum mechanical entities, and quantum fields, by their nature, never have classical contact. The interactions will be field interactions, carried by force-mediating particles across distances that may be very small but remain finite. Even in the most extreme environment in the known universe, the interior of a black hole, the prohibition on true contact holds. Not because gravity has not tried to force things together, because quantum mechanics does not permit classical contact. And quantum mechanics, we have every reason to believe, applies everywhere in the universe, including the interiors of black holes. The Planck length at 10 to the minus 35 meters represents the scale at which quantum gravitational effects become important. At that scale, the smooth geometry of space-time may break down. The distinction between points in space may lose meaning. What touching would mean at the Planck scale is genuinely unknown, because our best theories cannot describe physics there. But below the Planck scale, if below is even a meaningful concept at that scale, we have no physics. We have no theory. We have only the expectation that whatever the correct theory of quantum gravity says, it will probably preserve the essential feature that has held at every other scale we have examined. That interactions are carried by fields and particles across distances. That contact, in the classical sense, is not a feature of the physical world. The implications of all this reach into territory that feels philosophical, but is grounded in real physics. If nothing truly touches, then what is the nature of physical interaction? What does it mean for one thing to affect another? The answer is information exchange through fields. When you press a button, you affect the button by exchanging electromagnetic field quanta with it, which changes its configuration. When you speak, you create pressure waves in the air, which propagate as oscillations of air molecules that affect each other through electromagnetic interactions, which eventually affect the molecules in someone else's ear, which stimulate their neural cells through electromagnetic interactions, which create the neural patterns they experience as sound. Every causal chain in the physical world is a chain of field interactions. Every effect has a cause that reached it through field exchange. No cause has ever reached an effect through direct contact. The world is made of influences propagating through fields. This means the universe is relational through and through. Nothing exists in isolation. Everything is what it is because of its field relationships with everything else. The electron in an atom is what it is because of its electromagnetic relationship with the nucleus and with the other electrons. The atom is what it is because of its quantum field relationships among its constituents. The molecule is what it is because of the quantum field relationships among its constituent atoms. You are a pattern of field relationships. Your body is not a collection of solid things. It is a self-sustaining pattern of quantum field interactions, maintained by the continuous exchange of force-carrying particles among 37 trillion cells made of molecules, made of atoms, made of electrons, and nuclei made of protons and neutrons made of quarks and gluons. The pattern is real. The relationships are real. The field interactions are real. But the solid substance you imagine yourself to be made of is a simplification a macroscopic description of quantum field dynamics that is useful at the scale of human experience, but misleading about the actual structure of the world. There is a beautiful symmetry in the fact that the prohibition on touching is the mechanism that makes relationship possible. Think about it. If electrons could genuinely touch, if two electrons could occupy the same point in space, chemistry would not exist. The electron states that make chemical bonds possible require that each electron occupy a distinct quantum state. The variety of chemistry, the richness of molecular structures, the complexity of proteins and DNA and neural tissue, all depend on electrons being distributed across distinct states, never collapsing into a single point. The prohibition on touching distributes electrons across space. That distribution is what gives atoms their structure. That structure is what gives molecules their shape. That shape is what gives proteins their function. That function is what gives cells their capacity for chemistry. That chemistry is what gives organisms their complexity. That complexity is what gives rise to brains. Those brains are what give rise to minds. Those minds are what ask questions like, why does nothing truly touch? The rule that prevents contact is the rule that builds complexity. The impossibility of touching is the foundation of relationship. The electron that cannot touch another electron must instead interact with it at a distance, and that distance interaction is chemistry, is biology, is us. This is perhaps the deepest thing the prohibition on touching reveals. The universe is not made of things that contact each other. It is made of relationships between fields that interact without touching. And those relationships, those field interactions across small but finite distances, are what the world is built from. We are not made of matter. We are made of relationships between quantum fields. We are patterns of interaction in a universe that has never permitted true contact and has built everything from the space between. The Voyager golden record drifting through interstellar space is a message built by relationships. The atoms of gold in the record are bound by electromagnetic interactions. The information encoded in its grooves is a pattern of spatial relationships on the metal surface. The music it contains is a representation of pressure waves that were themselves patterns of molecular interactions in air. The voices greeting alien civilizations are compressions of air caused by vibrations of vocal cords moved by muscles controlled by electrochemical signals in neural tissue. All of it chains of field interaction. Never any true contact. The message was made by creatures whose entire experience of the physical world was mediated by electromagnetic fields, keeping them at a distance from everything they thought they touched. They never felt the record they made. They felt the electromagnetic response to the record's surface. They never touched the tools that made it. They felt the electromagnetic resistance of the tools. They never touched each other, the engineers who assembled it, the scientists who chose the music, the technicians who loaded it onto the spacecraft. They felt the electromagnetic fields of each other's skin, and they sent it into space. This floating message made of field relationships aboard a spacecraft whose metal surfaces have traveled 14 billion miles through the interstellar medium without touching a single atom of that medium in the classical sense. Virtual photon exchanges with passing hydrogen atoms, electromagnetic interactions with the galactic magnetic field, all at a distance, always at a distance. The golden record is the universe's most distant artifact. of a species that built everything it ever built from the rule that nothing touches. That used the prohibition on contact to construct language and music and mathematics and spacecraft and the capacity to wonder about why the prohibition exists. We have never touched anything. And from that absolute constraint, we have made everything. What does all of this mean? We began with a fact that sounds shocking and ends with something more profound than the shock. You have never touched anything, and that is not a deprivation. It is the mechanism by which you exist. We found that atoms are almost entirely empty space, with their properties determined by quantum field configurations rather than by solid substance. We found that the force preventing interpenetration is electromagnetic, the same force that produces light, that builds chemical bonds, that sustains life. We found that Pauli exclusion, the quantum mechanical rule against identical fermions sharing states, contributes a second layer of resistance to compression, one that has no classical analog but gives the universe its chemical richness. We found that the most extreme environments in the cosmos, neutron stars, quark-gluon plasma, the black hole interior, approach but never achieve true contact, always remaining regimes of field interaction at short but finite distances. We found that light itself does not touch matter, but is absorbed and re-emitted through quantum field processes. We found that all four fundamental forces operate through exchange of force-carrying particles across distances, making interaction at a distance not an exception, but the universe's fundamental mode of operation. And we found that the prohibition on touching is the foundation of chemistry, of complexity, of biology, of everything. 7 discoveries, each one revealing a different aspect of the same deep truth. The universe is not made of things that touch. It is made of fields that interact. And from that interaction at a distance, everything is built. The solidity of the world is real. The warmth of human contact is real. The pain of impact is real. The joy of physical experience is real. None of it is diminished by knowing its mechanism, but all of it is made richer by understanding that what we experience as the meeting of solid things is actually the negotiation of quantum fields at the smallest scales. That the boundary between you and the world is not where your skin meets air, but where your electron clouds negotiate with the electron clouds of everything around you. You are held up by electromagnetic repulsion. You are warmed by electromagnetic interaction. You are nourished by electromagnetic chemistry. You see by electromagnetic absorption. You think by electrochemical signals. You exist as a pattern of quantum field relationships, sustained against the relentless forces that would dissolve those relationships. And you are made of the same quantum fields as everything you have never touched. The atoms of your body were forged in stellar cores and scattered by stellar explosions. They have been part of oceans and rocks and ancient organisms and the atmosphere, and now they are temporarily organized into the pattern that is you. After you, they will be part of other things, never touching them, always interacting. The universe is not made of separate solid things that bump into each other in the dark. It is one continuous field of quantum interactions, organizing itself into patterns we call particles, atoms, molecules, cells, organisms, minds. The patterns are real, the minds are real, the experience is real, but the touching was always an illusion. And it turns out the reality beneath the illusion is more extraordinary than anything the illusion was hiding. We have never touched anything, and the universe, precisely because of that, is everything it is.